He wakes up at 4:47 a.m. not because an alarm went off, but because his brain has been running numbers in his sleep. Nobody in his neighborhood knows what he actually does. His neighbors think he does something with real estate. His extended family thinks he runs one small logistics company. His own mother thinks he works a regular corporate job with a fancy title. The truth is stranger than any of that. He owns 10 businesses, not one. 10. A staffing agency, a small chain of cloud kitchens, a used machinery export unit, a digital marketing shop, a tiny NBFC-style lending arm, a packaging manufacturer, a logistics fleet, a content and media studio, a real estate holding entity, and a software services company that quietly builds internal tools for the other 9. And almost nobody knows he owns all of them because officially he doesn't. On paper, he's a consultant, an advisor, a silent partner, a name that shows up nowhere except in a private folder of shareholding agreements that only his lawyer and his accountant have ever fully seen. This is the story of what it actually feels like to live like that, not the glamorous version people imagine when they hear holding company owner running multiple businesses in secret, not a mysterious billionaire in a dark office with 6 monitors. Just a tired, disciplined, slightly paranoid, extremely organized human being who decided a long time ago that visibility is a liability and quiet control is a superpower. It didn't start this way. 6 years ago, he had one business, a small agency helping local shops build their online presence. It was profitable, boring, and completely tied to his name. Everyone knew he was the website guy, and that was fine until he noticed something uncomfortable. Every single deal, every client conversation, every negotiation ran through his personal reputation. If he sneezed wrong on a sales call, the whole business felt it. If a client didn't like him personally, the deal died, no matter how good the work was. He realized his entire empire, small as it was built on one fragile thing: his own face and his own name. So he started an experiment. He hired someone to be the public face of a second business, a small logistics side project he'd started almost as a hobby. He stayed in the background, took no interviews, signed no contracts under his own name, appeared on no company website. He built the systems, hired the manager, wrote the SOPs, and disappeared into the org chart as a mysterious director who nobody ever met in person. 6 months later, that business was running better than the one everyone thought was his main business. Not because it was a better idea, but because it wasn't dependent on one person's charisma. It ran on structure. That was the moment everything changed for him. He didn't want to be famous. He wanted to be unnecessary. He wanted businesses that worked whether he showed up or not, and he wanted his name kept far away from the paperwork so that no single failure, no single lawsuit, no single bad partnership could ever touch everything else he'd built. People assume secrecy like this is about ego or mystery. It's not. It's about risk. When you own one business under your own name and it fails, you fail. When you own 10 businesses through separate legal entities, each ring-fenced from the others, one failure is just a line item, a lesson, not a funeral. He learned early that most business owners collapse everything they build into one identity, their own. One bad year, and their entire life status changes. He refused to let that be his story. So how does a single person actually run 10 businesses without anyone realizing it's all connected? The honest answer: he doesn't run them. He runs the systems that run them. Each business has its own general manager, its own P&L, its own bank accounts, its own local decision-making authority. His job isn't to answer emails from customers or manage day-to-day fires. His job is something far less exciting and far more powerful: designing the incentive structures, reviewing weekly numbers, replacing underperforming managers, allocating capital between the businesses, and staying 2 steps removed from operations at all times. His week looks nothing like what people imagine. Monday morning isn't spent hustling. It's spent reviewing 10 different dashboards, each one a simplified snapshot: revenue, margin, cash position, and one red flag if something's wrong. He doesn't read reports for hours. He's trained himself to read a dashboard in 90 seconds and know exactly which business needs his attention that week. Most weeks, 7 or 8 of the 10 businesses need zero intervention from him. That's the entire point. If a business constantly needs him personally hands-on every single week, he considers that business broken, not thriving. Tuesdays are for people, not spreadsheets. He calls it manager maintenance. Every general manager across his companies gets a short check-in, sometimes 15 minutes, sometimes an hour, where he asks 3 questions. What's blocking you? What decision do you need from me? What's the one thing that would break if I wasn't reachable this week? That last question terrifies most business owners because they never want to know the answer. He asks it constantly because the answer tells him exactly where he still has too much personal dependency baked into a business that's supposed to be independent. Nobody in these companies calls him the owner. Most employees, if you ask them, would describe him as an investor or someone on the board, or simply wouldn't know his name at all. He's deliberately built layers between himself and the front line. The Cloud Kitchen staff have never met him. The lending arm's loan officers report to a CEO who reports to a holding entity whose signatory is his lawyer, not him. Even his family, when they ask what he's working on, get vague, boring answers. Some consulting work, a few investments. Nobody presses further because nobody imagines the truth is more interesting than the boring answer he gives them. This secrecy isn't paranoia for its own sake, though he'll admit there's a psychological comfort in it too. There's a real practical reason behind almost every layer of separation he's built. When one of his companies got sued 2 years ago, a supplier dispute that spiraled into a legal mess, the lawsuit named the company, not him. His personal assets were never at risk because the company was properly structured as its own legal entity with its own liability, if his name had been publicly attached to that business as the owner everywhere. From the website to the invoices to local news coverage, the pressure and reputational damage would have bled into every other business he owned. Instead, it stayed contained. Most people never even knew that lawsuit happened, including people who worked for his other companies. There's a loneliness to this life that nobody talks about. He can't post about his wins. He can't tell people at a dinner party that he actually owns 10 companies because the moment he does, 2 things happen. People start asking questions he doesn't want to answer, and people start treating him differently, either with suspicion or with a kind of transactional interest that makes him uncomfortable. So he keeps quiet. He lets people believe smaller, safer versions of his life. Yes, he does some consulting. Yes, he has a few investments. He smiles, changes the subject, and goes home to spend his evening reviewing acquisition targets for an 11th business nobody will ever hear about either. His relationship with money is strange too. He doesn't live like someone who controls the combined revenue of 10 businesses. His house is comfortable, but not extravagant. His car is reliable, not flashy. He's terrified of the version of wealth that broadcasts itself because visible wealth invites visible scrutiny, and visible scrutiny is exactly what his entire structure is designed to avoid. Every business he owns generates cash, and almost all of that cash gets redeployed, not spent. A new acquisition here. A capital injection into a struggling unit there. A cash reserve fund that exists purely so that if one business has a terrible quarter, it never has to touch the profits of another. The hardest part of running 10 businesses in secret isn't the businesses themselves. It's the constant internal negotiation between control and trust. He has to let managers make decisions he might not fully agree with, because if he steps in and corrects every small thing, he becomes the bottleneck, and a bottleneck defeats the entire purpose of building something that doesn't depend on him. But letting go is hard. Every entrepreneur who's ever built something from nothing knows this feeling. The terror of watching someone else make a decision about your baby and having to sit on your hands instead of jumping in. He's made peace with a particular kind of failure that most business owners never accept. Some of his 10 businesses aren't spectacular. 2 of them are honestly mediocre, barely breaking even some quarters. But he keeps them because a mediocre business that runs itself with almost zero attention is worth more to him than an exciting business that demands his constant presence. That's a mindset shift almost nobody teaches. Most people chase excitement. He chases independence. A boring business that doesn't need him is infinitely more valuable to his actual goal than an exciting one that does. Weekends are supposedly off, but there's no real off switch when you're holding this many moving parts in your head. Saturday mornings, he reviews a master spreadsheet nobody else has ever seen, a single document that maps every business, every manager, every key risk, every renewal date, every loan covenant, every insurance policy. It's updated weekly, whether he's on vacation or not. This document, more than any bank balance, is the real asset. If something happened to him tomorrow, this document is what would let his lawyer and his family untangle 10 separate operating businesses without chaos. He's seen too many stories of business owners who die or disappear suddenly, leaving behind a mess that takes years in lawsuits to sort out, simply because everything lived in their head and nowhere else. He refuses to be that cautionary tale. There's an emotional cost to being the invisible owner of visible success. When one of his companies wins an award or gets a nice write-up in a local business publication, he can't celebrate publicly. He watches from a distance, proud and private, while someone else, his hired CEO or general manager, gets photographed shaking hands and smiling for the camera. He's made his peace with this too, mostly. He tells himself the goal was never recognition. The goal was freedom, structure, and risk that stays contained in 10 separate boxes instead of one giant vulnerable box with his name on it. Most days, that's enough. Some nights, especially after a long call where a manager gets praised publicly for something he originally designed, it stings a little. He doesn't talk about that sting to anyone. It's just part of the quiet trade he made. His decision-making process across 10 businesses follows a discipline most people would find almost boringly repetitive. Every acquisition, every new venture, every expansion gets run through the same 3 filters before he commits a single rupee. Can this business run without me within 18 months? Can this business be legally and financially separated from everything else I own? Is the downside of this business contained, meaning if it completely fails, does it hurt anything else I've built? If a new opportunity fails even one of those 3 filters, he walks away, no matter how exciting the numbers look. This filter has cost him a few genuinely lucrative opportunities over the years, deals that could have made him significantly richer, faster. He doesn't regret walking away from a single one of them because the businesses he did say yes to are still standing today, quietly generating income, completely disconnected from each other's problems. People often ask, when they eventually find out the truth, usually years into a friendship, why he never just came out and became the face of a bigger combined empire. Why not brand it? Why not become the visible founder of a conglomerate? Get the interviews, get the recognition, build a personal brand around the whole portfolio. His answer is always the same. The moment his name becomes the brand, his personal risk becomes the collective risk. One scandal, one bad partnership, one lawsuit involving him personally, and suddenly all 10 businesses are tainted by association. All 10 sets of employees are worried. All 10 sets of customers start asking questions. He'd rather be quietly wealthy and boring than loudly successful and fragile. There's also a strange kind of protection this secrecy gives to the people who work for him. Managers running these businesses get full credit for their wins in public. Customers build loyalty to the brand and the visible team, not to some hidden owner they'll never meet. Employees feel ownership over their piece of the business because in a very real sense, they are the face and the decision makers of what customers see. He's found that businesses run better when the person actually managing daily operations gets to feel like the real leader, instead of constantly operating in the shadow of a visible, hovering owner. His invisibility, in a strange way, makes his managers stronger, more confident, and more accountable. 10 businesses also means 10 completely different rhythms of crisis. The cloud kitchen chain has weekly food safety and staffing headaches. The lending arm has monthly regulatory and collection issues, and the export business deals with currency swings and shipping delays that can wipe out a quarter's margin overnight. The software company deals with talent retention and client churn. He's learned to hold all of these different rhythms in his head simultaneously without letting one crisis bleed emotional energy into how he handles another. A brutal week in the lending business doesn't get to ruin his calm, measured call with the export team the next morning. This compartmentalization, treating each business as its own emotional container, took years to build as a skill. Early on, a bad week in one business would poison his mood, his decisions, and his patience across everything else. Now each business gets its own emotional box, opened and closed deliberately. If you ask him what the actual secret is, beyond the legal structuring and the layers of managers and the quiet accounts, he'll tell you it's something much simpler and much less glamorous. The secret is documentation. Every process, every decision framework, every recurring problem and its solution gets written down. Not because he's an obsessive planner by nature, but because writing something down is the only way to remove himself from being the single point of failure. A business that only exists in his head can only ever be as big as his own attention span. A business that exists in documented systems, checklists, and clear decision trees can run at 3 in the morning while he's asleep, on a different continent, at a wedding, or simply taking a day off without checking his phone. He thinks about legacy differently than most entrepreneurs do. He's not building a personal brand that dies with him. He's building 10 separate, boring, resilient machines that could theoretically keep running even if he stepped away completely tomorrow. That's the actual definition of wealth he's chosen for himself. Not visibility, not fame, not a name on a building. Just quiet, distributed, well-documented control over 10 small kingdoms that nobody outside a tiny circle of lawyers and accountants even knows are connected. Late at night, after the dashboards are reviewed and the manager's calls are done and the master spreadsheet is updated for the week, he sometimes sits with a simple thought. Nobody at the grocery store knows who he is. Nobody at his kids' school event has any idea that the man quietly chatting about weekend plans owns a small empire spread across 10 unrelated industries, and that anonymity, that complete lack of recognition, isn't a burden to him anymore. It's the entire design. It's the point. Because the moment everyone knows everything you own, you stop owning it freely and you start defending it publicly every single day for the rest of your life. He chose a different trade. Quiet control over loud recognition, and most days, watching those 10 dashboards light up green one by one without a single fire that needs his personal attention, he'd make that same trade all over again.